All right, good night or good evening, everybody. Welcome again to the next session here. We're going to be working on the factor market tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video and go ahead and start sharing the screen here. We can get started. Give me a sec here. All right, we're going to jump right into this tonight. So tonight, like I say, we're starting the factor market. It's the next thing we've done. All the perfect competition, monopoly, monopolist competition, and oligopoly. What we're going to do is we're going to move to the other side of the story now. We're going to move to the cost side. We did, average total cost, average variable cost, marginal cost, all that stuff. We drew all that. But what we're looking at now is we're going to look at actually that whole market. Where do the resources come from and that sort of stuff. So, up until now, like I said, what we've been doing is we've been doing the product market. And in the product market, we've got just good old supply and demand. Okay, that's the main thing that comes off this. You've got your upward supply, your downward demand. And from that, we know the quantity of the product, whether it be apple pies or bicycles or sodas or whatever, and the price of that product, right? And that's in the product market. Where we're going to go next, like I said, is the factor market. Okay. The factor market and the main thing we deal with in the factor market is workers. Almost always we talk about workers. We talk about like the quantity of labor, not the quantity of production, but the quantity of labor, something like that. There's other factors of production in there. There's land, labor, capital, and those are all in the factor market also. But we mainly deal with the demand for workers, and the demand for workers affects the cost of production, but it then also affects the output, right? Because you've got to have the workers in order to produce a product, right? So when you're dealing with these problems here, just really always pay attention to what market you're in. Are you in the product market where we're dealing with a quantity of a product, like I said, quantity of apple pies or whatever? Are we dealing with the factor market where we're dealing with the number of workers that we're hiring to produce those products? And so like right now, up until this point, we've always been in the product market. Now we're moving into the factor market here. All right. This is important because the money that's spent on the productive resources gives the households money to purchase goods and services. I'm getting paid to be a teacher, and then I turn around and I buy goods and services from companies that are making stuff. And if I didn't have a job getting paid, then I couldn't buy goods and services. And that's kind of this whole round robin thing that's going around here. Another thing to think about is that if a good is in great demand, then that means the resources used to produce that good are going to be in great demand. And that kind of going to come by here in just a few minutes here. If we really want a whole lot more basketballs produced, then we need more workers to produce those basketballs. And that's kind of common sense, but a lot of times I found that my students that they struggle over that concept a little bit when it actually comes to applying it to the economics, which we'll be doing here in a few minutes here. So again, all the cost curves we've done up to this point are all based on this. They're all based on what's going on in this factor market that I'm about to show you here. Fortunately, in the factor market, there's only two different markets. There's the perfect competitive factor market, and there's something called a monopsony. We don't have anything in between, like in the product market, we have perfect competition, we have monopolistic competition, we have oligopoly, we have monopoly. In the factor market, we just have the perfect competitive factor market and the monopsony. So that makes it a little bit easier, and we'll be going through those two tonight. Right. Marginal product, we've seen this all along. Marginal product is the change in total product divided by the change in the quantity of the resource. It's really how much additional production, marginal product, you get from hiring another unit of resource, usually labor. And we know all about the diminishing marginal returns. That is, you add more and more of a variable resource like labor to a fixed resource like a machine, that eventually you get this diminishing marginal returns. This was a big concept in the earlier units that you had to talk about a couple times on both some daily work and also the tests. So the diminishing marginal returns. I'm just refreshing your memory on this because it's all going to come together here in a little bit here. All right, so this is a chart here, and it looks kind of scary when you first look at it, but you actually know everything about this chart except for the last column. And what we're doing is we're actually going to build this last column with this. Okay, so the first column is a quantity of resource. This is actually the quantity of, say, labor. How many workers we have? We have 0 workers, 1 worker, 2 workers, so on and so forth. The second column is total product, which is actually quantity of output. So you've got these two quantities back to back. The first is the quantity of labor. The second is the quantity of output. And notice the quantity of output doesn't go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Normally, when we in the product market, we make the quantity of output go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in reality, that's not the way it works. When we hire this first worker and they give us 7 units of output, which by the way is the marginal product, right? The first worker doesn't give you 1 unit, the second worker doesn't give you another unit, the third worker doesn't give you another unit, so on and so forth. You actually get the situation when you hire the first worker, they give you 7 additional units or marginal product. And I'll come back to that in just a second, but I'm gonna just go and put marginal product here. It's really the same thing as marginal physical product. I'll talk about that in a minute. The first worker gives you 7 units. Second worker gives you 6 more units. So our quantity actually goes from 7 to 13. The third worker gives you 5 more units. So it goes to 18. So this doesn't go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like we do in the earlier units. The earlier units, we do that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stuff to make it easier to understand. And so you have these nice, pretty graphs. But in reality, it's not going to look like that. Okay, so back over here to this third column, this marginal physical product. When we get to the factor market, for some reason economics does this. They like to make it, I don't know, just make it difficult on you, really. Marginal physical product is the exact same as marginal product. Okay, and you notice that we've already got law of diminishing marginal returns. As you add another unit of resource over here, the labor, to a fixed resource like capital, which we don't have on this chart here, notice the marginal product is diminishing. This is the law of diminishing marginal production. Okay, fourth column is just the price of the product, just P, just the price that we're charging for this product. And we're going to charge $2. That means that we're in a perfect competitive market. We're going to charge $2 no matter how many units we produce. And then we get total revenue. You already know about total revenue. Total revenue is price times quantity. So in this case, it would be 7 times 2 is 14, 13 times 2 is 26, and so on and so forth. So again, you can see the first 5 columns you understand. It's this last column, it's that 6th column that we're really focusing on tonight. This is called the marginal revenue product. Okay, marginal revenue product, as we're going to see here, I'm going to come back to this column thing, this chart in just a minute here. The marginal revenue product is the change in total revenue that's brought about from adding another unit of variable input. Okay, so let me go back to the chart here. So this 14 is just, it's how much more money shows up in the cash register, the change in total revenue that brought about from hiring this first worker. When we hired this first worker, they produced 7 units that we sold for $2 a piece, so 14 more dollars showed up in our cash register. When we hired the second worker, they brought in 6 more units that we sold for $2 a piece, so they added $12 to the cash register. And this is a neat thing to look at, because what we really want to know is how much revenue is each of these workers over here giving us. This 5th worker was able to produce 3 more additional units. So we got 3, sold them for $2 a piece. We got $6 more in our cash register. Notice it goes down. The reason why marginal revenue product decreases is because the marginal product is decreasing. Right, so if the marginal product is decreasing, the marginal revenue product is also decreasing. So this is what this whole unit is about. It's about this marginal revenue product curve that we have here on the far right of the marginal revenue product column. In a minute, I'm going to show you the curve here. Now, there's two ways of calculating MRP. First, and the most accurate way is the change in total revenue divided by the change in the quantity of the resource. And we almost always do labor. Okay, that's by far the best way to do it. If we're dealing with perfect competition in a perfect competitive factor market, then you can actually do it. You can actually say that marginal revenue product is marginal product times price. So if I go back over here, the way I was actually just showing you it, I was actually doing 7 times 2 is equal to 14. And 6 times 2 is equal to 12. So I was actually doing marginal product times price because this is perfect competition. The price doesn't change. But the other way you can calculate, which is actually the best way to do it, because you'll always get the right answer, is it's the change in total revenue. So the total revenue was 0 when we had 0 workers. 14 minus 0 divided by the change in quantity of labor, which is always 1 over here. So this would be 14 minus 0 divided by 1 minus 0. Down here, it's 44 minus 36, which is 8, divided by 4 minus 3. Okay, that will also always get you marginal revenue product, because in a few minutes, we're going to do a monopoly or an imperfect competitor, and this won't always be the same price. So you can't do marginal product times price unless the price doesn't change. So that's how you calculate marginal revenue product. Again, don't forget to stop, pause, and rewind in these videos and go back and listen to what I'm saying. I'm going through this very, very rapidly, and you need to know what each of these things are. You need to know how to calculate them. You need to understand the stuff fully. All right, so what does marginal revenue product curve look like? Okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're dealing with labor. So we're going to label this as W for wage. On the AP exam, if you label it as P, you're okay. But let's be exact here, and let's go ahead and call it W for wage. And we're talking about workers. So this is going to be quantity of labor. If you label this just quantity, you lose credit, because just quantity tells you you're in the product market. This is a factor market situation. So you got to label this as quantity of labor. You could have also done it quantity of capital. You could have done it quantity of rent or land. I'm sorry, of land. If you were talking about the land or capital, but usually we're always talking about labor. So we're going to just always do it Q of L. Okay. And the MRP is downward sloping. And this is actually going to be the demand for the worker, and it's the MRP. So you want to label them as both. So if you look at this back here, this chart, you can see it's downward sloping right here, right? And this is the same thing as the demand, going to be the demand for the worker, and it's also the MRP downward sloping. All right, so that now we've devised our MRP here. We found out where it came from. We see this downward sloping. Now I'm going to change the story a little bit, okay? And I'm going to do this, and you notice the first 3 columns are identical to what we've done up to this point. But in this 4th column, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this an imperfect competitor. Well, an imperfect competitor is one that in order to sell another unit, have to lower the price on that unit on all previous units. So notice the price doesn't just stay at $2. We're actually having to lower the price to sell more of the product, right? So we got unit of resource, quantity of labor is the same, quantity of output's the same, marginal product's the same, but price is going to be different here. Okay, price is different. So when we get to this, total revenue is also the same. It's price times quantity. But when we get to calculating the MRP here now on this last column, we cannot do 7, marginal product times price. Okay, we can't do 6 times 240. That's not equal to 13. So we can't do it that way. So now we have to do it the way I showed you, which is the change in total revenue, which is 1820 minus 0 divided by 1 minus 0 is 1820. And then down here, we'll go further down, $44 minus 39.60 is $4.40 divided by 4 minus 3. So it's the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity of labor. So we have to do that to get the MRP. And notice when you look at this MRP right here, notice it starts at 1820 and it actually becomes negative at this point. But look how quickly this guy is falling. Where when we come over here, this other one, it's not falling as fast. Okay, this goes from 14 to 2. And when we deal with an imperfect competitor, it actually falls a whole lot faster, which brings us to the next point we want to do here. If we were going to compare a perfect competitor, demand for labor in the factor market. So we got a perfect competitor. This is going to be a perfect competitor in the product market, meaning the price doesn't change in the product market. Its demand curve is going to be more elastic. And this is the demand, which is the same thing as the MRP. Okay. If we come over here and let's do this, I'll do this in a different color. If we come over here, this is also quantity of labor, and this is wage, and this is an imperfect competitor in the product market. Okay. Its demand for labor is going to be more inelastic. Okay. And the imperfect competitor, again, this could be monopoly, monopolist competition, or oligopoly. We know that perfect competitors' demand for labor is more elastic. Imperfect competitor in the product market's demand curve is more inelastic. And of course, the numbers show this because the only thing I changed here was the market price. So they bring that in every once in a while in the AP exam, so I want to make sure you're aware of that. All right, so why is the MRP falling? Okay, well, for the perfect competitor, it's falling because marginal product is falling. Okay, oops, that's not perfect either. Go back 2 more. Sorry about that. For the perfect competitor, marginal product is decreasing, price stays the same. So this downward sloping MRP right here on the far right is because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. For an imperfect competitor, it's because both of law of diminishing marginal returns, yes, marginal product is decreasing, but also because in order to sell another, you have to lower the price. So you've got the change in marginal product and the change in price, and that's what's going to make this MRP steeper. The change in price is what makes that MRP steeper. So it's a combination of the two that determines the slope of the marginal revenue product curve. Okay. We always teach you curves, and then the first thing we do is we shift it. So now we're going to shift the MRP because the demand for the labor can change. There are 2 things that affect the demand for the labor. First is the price of the product in the product market, and the second is the productivity of the worker. Okay, so the price of the product and the productivity of the worker, how productive the worker is, will affect the demand for that worker, the demand for labor. We call this derived demand. If they ever ask it on the AP exam, you got to explain it. You got to say derived demand is the demand for the worker derives from or comes from the price of the product and the productivity of the worker. So just, you need to memorize that. Price of the product and the productivity of the worker. And I'm about to show you what these both mean. Okay, price of the product. You change the price of the product, then the demand for the worker is going to change. So let's go back, and this is the same chart that I showed you earlier, but I'm just going through 4 workers as opposed to the other one. I think I want to do like 7 or whatever. So again, just refresh your memory. This is the quantity of labor, how many workers we're hiring. This is the quantity of output that they're producing. This is the marginal product. This is the price of the product, and this is the total revenue, and this is the MRP. Okay, so this is where we are right now. You've seen all these numbers, so this is what the MRP would look like. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in and I'm going to change the price of the product. Okay, I'm going to change the price of the product. And when I change the price of the product, let's see what happens here. Okay, well, let's make the price of the product $3. So now instead of being 2, this is going to be 3, 3, 3, 3. This is perfect competition. So when I raise the price from $2 to $3, it's 3 for everything. Now, again, prices don't just change. Okay, so what would have happened to cause that price to change? Well, if this was the product market you would have had your supply and demand curve. And prior to this, this is the quantity that would have been out there. And this would have been the price of the product. And in fact, we said the price of the product is actually $2, right? So something's got to give to make the price of the product go up. Okay. What could that be? Well, it could have been that there was an increase in the demand for the product. People want more of whatever this thing is. Or it could actually have been there's a decrease in supply of that product. Both those would make the price go up, right? And we drew this and we've seen this and you've done this, and so you understand that. I just want to make sure that when I change that, when I show you here me changing the price here, it didn't just happen. There had to have been something in the market that caused it to happen, right? So let's go back to our story here. So in the marginal product price changes, there's a couple things we can do. First of all, we've got to change the total revenue now, because total revenue is price times quantity. So this becomes 21. This becomes 6, 12, 18. This becomes 15. And this becomes 12, right? That's not right. That's not right at all. I multiplied times the wrong things. This becomes 7 times 3, which is 21. This becomes 13 times 3, which is 39. This becomes 18 times 3, which is 54. And this becomes 22 times 3, which is 66. Okay, so your total revenue goes from 14, 26, 36, 44 to 21, 39, 54, 66. But that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about this one over here, right? So MRP, there's two different ways of calculating it. The easiest way, since the price is the same, perfect competition, we can just do marginal product times price. So this becomes 21, which is what I did a minute ago, 18, 15, and 12, right? Or we could have done the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity of labor. So this was 0. So 0, 21 minus 0 is 21 divided by 1 minus 0. 39 minus 21 is 18 divided by 2 minus 1. So it's always divided by 1 over here. So anyway, so there's two different ways of calculating MRP. But ultimately, what I want you to see here is look at this MRP. This is your first MRP. And the one in red is your second MRP. What happened to it? It shifted to the right. And that's the idea here, that anytime there's a change in the price of the product, the MRP curve shifts. And I can tell you that when the price of the product goes up, the MRP shifts to the right. When the price of the product goes down, the MRP shifts left. Okay, so price of the product goes up, MRP shifts to the right. Price of the product goes down, MRP shifts to the left. Memorize that. Increase price shifts the MRP to the right. And this kind of makes sense. If the price of the product goes up, that means we got more money coming out our cash register, so we actually want more workers. If the price of the product goes down, we have less money coming in our cash register, so we actually want less workers. So that's one of the two things that shifts the MRP, price of the product. The second is going to be the productivity of the worker. Now, this one is counterintuitive. All right. If it doesn't make sense until I show you the numbers here. If workers become more productive, we actually want more workers, not less. If workers become more productive, we want more workers. And I'm going to show this to you right here. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you the exact same numbers we started with a few minutes ago. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make each worker more productive by 1. Okay, by just 1 more unit. Each worker can produce 1 more than they did before. All right. So what's going to happen is this is the quantity of labor. First worker before was producing 7 additional units. I'm going to make this 8. Second worker was producing 6 additional workers. I'm going to make this 7. The next worker is going to produce 5, but was producing 5. We're going to make this 6, and this is going to be 5. Okay, so now we've got our new marginal product. Each worker is producing one more additional than they did before, right? Product price is still $2. So what is the MRP? Well, 8 times 2 is 16. 7 times 2 is 14. 6 times 2 is 12. And 5 times 2 is 10. Look what happened to the MRP. It shifted to the right. Okay. Product price didn't change, but the productivity of each worker did, which caused the MRP to shift to the right. Right. Now, I somehow deleted a page here. We'll come back to that in a second. So bottom line is this: price of the product goes up, MRP shifts to the right. Let me show this to you. Quantity of labor, wage. There's our demand for the worker, which is the MRP. And if the price of the product goes up, the demand curve shifts to the right. I did that as prime. Sorry about that. Old school. They don't do primes anymore. They do ones. So this would be an increase in the demand for the worker because of the increase in the price of the product. The other thing is the productivity of the worker. Increased productivity of the worker shifts the demand curve to the right. And of course, it would go the other way if price decrease or productivity of the worker decrease. All right. So we shifted the demand curve. Next thing we always do is we always shift these curves and then we change the slope of them. So now we're going to change the slope of this demand curve. And like I say, this is a lot. Make sure you're pausing and rewinding and thinking about this. Make sure you're using my class notes to follow along with this stuff here so you really, really understand this stuff here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change the slope of this demand curve. So we've got quantity of labor and we've got our wage rate. So this would be a normal old demand equals MRP. And if I told you no, it's actually going to be more inelastic, then you could draw it steeper like this. Okay. So this, the one on the right would be more an inelastic demand curve. The one on the left would be more elastic demand curve. And of course, I could draw one really, really flat to make it very, very elastic. Okay, what causes it to become more elastic or more inelastic? Okay, here's your determinants that changes elasticity. The first is the rate of marginal product decline. Okay, how fast, going back to this here, how fast is this falling down? Right? That's one of the things that will affect the how steep the MRP is. And what we find is that the steeper, if the marginal product declines, well, mine says slowly here. If marginal product declines slowly, right, as you add it to fixed capital, the demand for labor will go slowly. So in other words, if marginal product declines slowly, then marginal revenue product is going to be more elastic. If marginal product falls quickly, then MRP is going to fall quickly. Easy to remember because they go the same direction. So the rate of marginal product decline affects the rate of the marginal revenue product curve. Second thing is how easy is to substitute the resource. If there's a large number of things you can substitute that resource for, then the elasticity of demand for that resource is going to be fairly elastic. If you can use, let's say you're producing something, you can use tin, right? And use tin to produce something, but you can also use steel and copper and zinc and aluminum and all these other things. That's going to make your demand for tin to be very elastic. The more substitutes there are that can go in here, the more substitutes that can go in here, the more elastic the demand curve for the worker or for the resource. And there I was using metals. I wasn't using labor, but because there's really labor and capital, the only two substitutes for each other in most parts. So there we go. The third thing is the elasticity of the product demand curve itself. What we found is that, or what we know is that if the demand for the product is very elastic, so this is the demand for the product. So now we're back in the product market. If the demand for the product is very elastic, then the demand for the resource is also going to be elastic. So this is the MRP, which is the demand for the resource. So those kind of go together. So the more elastic the demand for the product, the more elastic the demand for the resource. So you put these three things together, you put the rate of marginal product decline, you put the ease of substitutability for that resource, and then the demand, the elasticity of the product itself, and that's what determines the slope of your MRP. Okay. They usually always ask a question on that. It's usually just one. It's usually multiple choice. I think one year I do remember them asking something in the free response part about the slope of the demand curve for labor. But usually it's just a multiple choice question. So that's your MRP. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and introduce the perfect competitive factor market here and show you this. And by the way, we're not going to get through the entire factor market modules. Okay, this is the FMA module, stands for factor market. And we're not going to get through this whole unit tonight. I'm going to get to a certain point and then I'll stop. And then next week I will finish it. And next week I'll also have you do a practice problem. So that's the plan for next week. So, all right. So perfect competitive factor market. Okay. What we've got in order for it to be a perfect competitive factor market, we're in the factor market again, is there has to be many firms hiring. Okay, lots and lots of firms hiring. There have to be many qualified workers with identical skills, and each of these workers have to be acting independently, meaning no unions or things like that. And the firm is going to be a wage taker, okay, as are the people that are trying to work. Think of this as a bunch of high school students and college students applying for jobs. Okay. You guys are all about the same. All right. It doesn't matter if you're a sophomore or a junior or a senior, you're about the same. Now, in reality, maybe seniors are a little bit more mature and a business might want to hire a senior instead of a sophomore and that sort of stuff. But for this practical or for this exercise, assume you're all the same. You really don't have special skills. Okay, you're in high school, you don't, oh, wait a minute, I know all sorts of stuff. Yeah, you do. And in real life, you do have skills. But if you go to ask for a job at McDonald's, okay, what do you got to offer? Can you say, do you want fries with that, sir? Yes, you can, and so can pretty much every other high school student that's out there. So you really don't have anything special to offer. That's a perfect competitive factor market. Okay. There's many firms hiring. You can work at McDonald's, you can work at any fast food place, you can work for a vet, you can work for an accountant filing papers. There's tons and tons and tons of jobs that my students have had in the past, right? So there's many, many firms all hiring. Okay. Many qualified workers doing basically identical skills. And because of that, there's a wage that's out there that for the most part, you get hired for. And it's not minimum wage. Now, right now, especially, right now, minimum wage is like $6.75 or something like that. And most high school kids are getting paid about $10 an hour. Right. And so what's happening is the market is setting that wage. And, it's not like every place is going to pay exactly $10, but it's pretty close, right? That's what makes it a perfect competitive market. Where does the wage come from? It comes from the upward sloping supply curve in the factor market, the downward sloping demand curve. And this is where this wage comes from. Sorry, wrong side of my pen. This is where this wage comes from, right? Now, what do we got here? First of all, we've got the downward sloping demand. This is the demand for the worker. And this is backwards from the product market, because in the factor market, the business is the buyer. They're buying workers. When you go to apply for a job, they're buying workers. They have a demand for workers. And at a higher wage rate, they don't want very many workers. At a lower wage rate, they're willing and able to hire more workers. So you got a downward sloping demand for labor. The upward sloping supply is us. We're the sellers. In the factor market, we're the sellers that sell our workers. Sell our labor here, right? Now, we already know that the demand curve is downward sloping and it's the MRP, right? The supply curve is upward sloping because of the opportunity cost. If I was going to hire you and I said, hey, I need you to come, I don't know, come in and mow my grass. And you say, oh yeah, I got a lawnmower. I'll come mow your grass, And I say, okay, great. I pay $1 an hour. Okay. You're gonna be like, no, I forgot my lawnmower's broken, right? You're not willing to work way down here for $1 an hour, right? If I said, oh, I'm sorry, I meant I pay $100 an hour, well, then every single blooming one of my students for $100 an hour would be willing and able to work because, right? So there'd be a whole lot of workers out here to be like willing to work for $100 an hour. At $1 an hour, nobody's willing to work. Why? Because of opportunity cost. What are you giving up to come work for me? Right? And this supply curve isn't really the same for everybody because some of us have more stuff going on in our lives than others. Some people are like, yeah, I'll come work for, $6 an hour because I don't really care. And some of you are like, no, it's not worth my time to come work for $6 an hour. Right. And so but the point of the story here is the supply curve is us. It's upward sloping, our willingness and enableness to work. Demand curve is downward sloping because that's the willingness and enableness of the firm to hire us. And when these two guys come together, that's where the wage rate comes from. That's where the market wage rate comes from. Okay. Just like all markets, not only demand curve shifts, but supply curve shift. Well, I skipped that part here. Demand curve shift. Okay, the demand for the labor will shift. Okay, it's just what I did a few minutes ago. It's the MRP. So this guy here is actually the MRP, and we found out that it shifts because of the price of the product, productivity of the worker, right? And those are the two things: the price of the product, productivity of the worker. So this demand curve can increase, shift to the right, decrease, shift to the left based on the price of the product, productivity of the worker. But also now we're going to find out that the supply curve in the market can also shift, right? You kind of need to memorize this. Okay, changes in the determinants of supply, such as immigration, education, working conditions, age distribution, availability of alternative options, preference for leisure, and cultural expectations cause the labor supply curve shift. They put this into this course about 2-3 years ago, and I'm very sorry it's here. Every once in a while, they will ask a question on this. They're not going to make you list them. Don't memorize the list, but just think of it as common sense. If more immigrants enter the nation, then the supply curve shifts to the right. We have more workers. If people become better educated, then what happens is the supply of like minimum wage type jobs actually decreases because people who have higher education are not willing to work at McDonald's or work at, the vet's office cleaning out the poop or that sort of stuff, right? And so education can actually decrease the supply, or maybe it increases the supply of jobs that require higher education. Working conditions, people don't want to take jobs that the working conditions are poor. Age distribution, when there's a bunch of young people, then the supply curve tends to be higher to the right for minimum wage type jobs. When I say minimum wage type jobs, I just mean jobs that high school kids could and would take, right? If you have mainly older people, then the supply curve for all jobs pretty much shifts to the left because older people are retiring, so there's less workers. Availability of other options. If you can do something other than work, then supply curve shifts to the left. If there's no other options, then supply curve shifts to the right. Preference for leisure. People want to play and have fun, shifts to the left. Don't want to play and have fun, shifts to the right. Cultural expectations. You're expected to work, get a job, supply shifts to the right. Or no, you're expected to not work. Your full-time job is to be a student, supply curve shifts to the left. So this is just, again, a list that the College Board gives us. Understand the list. You're not going to have to list them out. for them, but there you go. All right. So what do we got here? For an individual firm, the demand is also the MRP. So what I'm going to do here is notice side-by-side graphs. If you're showing perfect competitive factor market, you have to do a side-by-side graph. We're going to have to do the one on the left is going to be the market, and we're going to have a wage rate. We're going to have our upward slope and supply curve, our downward slope and demand curve, and this is going to be the quantity of labor. And this is the MRP for the market. And this is going to be the market's wage rate. On the right, we're going to have the firm. So the one on the left, again, is the market. The one on the left is the market. The one on the right is now going to be the firm. Well, this little bitty firm here also has quantity of labor. It has a wage rate. This firm also has a demand for workers. So let's say this is the local ice cream parlor up the street, or the local McDonald's, or the local wherever it is that you guys like or would like to work for. They have a demand for the worker, and this demand for the workers we know comes from the price of the product, the worker of that little store. And let's say it's Brewster's Ice Cream up the street. Okay. Well, Brewster's Ice Cream needs workers, right? Where does the supply of workers come from? Well, based on the wage rate, Brewster's actually has an unlimited supply of workers. This is actually the supply of the worker, and it's perfectly elastic. Why is it perfectly elastic? Because let's say the wage rate is $10 an hour. There's lots and lots and lots of high school kids that can and will work for $10 an hour. So if Brewster's wants to hire one worker, way over here, they can. If they wanted to hire 100 workers, way over here, they can. They can find 100 workers because there's that many. If you go way back to what I said a few minutes ago, there are many, there it is. There are many firms hiring, and there's also many qualified workers. And you say, well, Pat Mickey, you're only talking about one little firm here. I thought you said there are many firms hiring. You're right. This is a typical firm. This is Brewster's or McDonald's or the vet or the accountant that's hiring you to file papers or whatever. It's a typical firm. And so we're just drawing one of these many, 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 many firms that are out there hiring. But the key here is that the supply curve is perfectly elastic, the downward slope and demand curve, right? And interesting enough, how many workers is Brewster's going to hire? It's based on the intersection of supply and demand. So that's how many workers Brewster's is going to hire, whether that's 3 workers or 4 workers or 5 workers, right? Now, the firm has no influence on the wage rate. This wage right here comes from the market. So you have to show the connection here. You have to do the dot, 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 showing this firm is a wage taker over here. All right. Now, one thing I want to add to this is the firm will look at the additional cost of hiring the worker. Okay, well, in this example here, if the wage is $10 an hour, how much does it cost to hire another worker for an hour? $10. What if we hire him for another hour? $10 more. What if I hire him for another hour? $10 more. So the additional cost of hiring another worker is the wage rate for a perfect competitive firm. Now we're going to add another abbreviation here. This is the marginal factor cost. Okay, it's the cost of the factor of production, the additional marginal cost of this factor of production. We call it the MFC. Okay, now some books, it's the MFC. Some books are also going to call this the MRC. Okay, for marginal resource cost. They're the exact same thing. And again, I apologize when this happens to you guys because, Georgia Virtual may call it MRC and the College Board may call it MFC or whatever, but the actual AP exam will call it one or the other. They're moving towards marginal factor cost. That's what's more readily in the textbooks now. So that's what they're moving to. But it stands for marginal factor cost or marginal resource cost. Okay. And for a perfect competitor, it's equal to wage. Only for a perfect competitor. Okay, when we get to imperfect competition in the factor market, it will not be, and that's looking like that'll be next week. All right, so in a perfect competitive labor market, the wage is set by the market, and each firm hires the quantity of workers where the marginal factor cost, which is the same thing as wage, equals the marginal revenue product of labor. A typical firm may be a perfect competitor in the labor market and an imperfect competitor in an output market. So this is an EK. This is what the College Board speak right here. So notice they use factor market, MFC and MRC here. And what they're saying, just putting this in English, is that a typical firm over here to the right will hire where the marginal factor cost, the additional cost of that worker, is equal to the additional revenue that comes in. This makes sense. If you're going to bring me $15 of revenue and you're asking me to pay you $10, yeah, I'll hire you. But if you're only going to bring in $9 more of revenue and you're asking me to pay you 10, no, I'm not going to hire you. So when do I stop hiring you? Okay, so the bottom line is this. Again, I'm just trying to show you this. If the marginal revenue product, the additional revenue coming in, is greater than the marginal factor cost. So the additional revenue that's coming in from hiring you is greater than the additional cost of hiring you, I would hire you, right? So let's say this is quantity of labor is 4. Okay. If when I get down here, we'll skip 3 for now. If I get down here to 2, because the law of diminishing marginal returns, your marginal revenue product is going to get smaller. So this number here on the left is going to get smaller. Marginal factor cost is the wage rate. This is the wage rate, and it's set by the market, so it doesn't change. But eventually, because diminishing marginal returns, we're going to get a situation where the marginal revenue product, the money you're bringing into me, is going to actually be less than the marginal factor cost. So like, here you're bringing in $20 and I'm paying you 10. And then now suddenly you're bringing in $8 and you want me to pay you 10. No, I'm not going to hire you. Oops, I'm not going to hire you. So where do you stop? You stop when the marginal revenue product is equal to the marginal factor cost. So this firm would hire 3 workers. They would hire I did this backwards. I am so sorry. They would hire the first worker. They would hire the second worker. They would not hire the third worker because the third worker is when the MRP is lower. Let's go back and show you that. Okay, I'm gonna go way back here and show it to you. Okay, this is the first worker. This is the second worker, and this is the third worker. Notice the MRP is decreasing as you hire additional workers, right? So the first worker brought in $15, the second worker brought in 10, and the third worker brought in, I think I said 8. So you would not hire the third worker because the MFC for this guy is right here. So you'd hire the 2 workers. All right. So all firms hire where MRP is equal to MFC. And if you're saying this sounds really familiar, Pat McKee, you're right. Because back when we did the product market, we found out that all firms produce where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. And I went through the whole explanation of why. They're the exact same concept, but just MR equals MC is in the product market, and MRP equals MFC is in the factor market. So, to minimize cost or maximize profits, firms allocate the inputs, meaning workers, such that the last dollar spent on each input yields the same amount of marginal product. Okay. What this is saying here is we actually want to hire where the last dollar spent on each input yields the same as marginal product. It's really marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Okay. The last dollar spent, marginal cost, yields the same amount of marginal product. Okay. But ultimately, you're going to then sell that product to bring in the revenue. Okay. I have to show this to you because this shows up in the AP exam. You're probably not going to see this at all in Georgia virtual stuff, tests that are coming up, but this does show up on the AP exam in a very, very, very blue moon. But the bottom line is the value of the marginal product of labor is what what you're selling it for. Okay, so we got this new thing. It's called the VMPL. Okay, and again, I apologize, y'all. This is an EK. It's the only time it ever shows up. It's not going to be tested on it. It has not been tested on the AP, or I'm sorry, for the Georgia Virtual at this point in time. It changed, but it has not been tested. But the value of the marginal product of labor is the same thing as the marginal product of labor times price. Okay, and you're going, wait, Pat Mickey. Earlier, when you said way back here, you said the MRP. Let me go back even further. Okay, you said this MRP right here, this $12 is the same thing as the marginal product times price. So 6 times 2 is 12. That is correct. That $12 right here is the value of the marginal product of labor. Versus this whole thing here, which is the whole curve, is the MRP. So said another way, in perfect competition, you've got your quantity of labor, you've got your wage rate, you've got your demand curve, which is the same thing as the MRP, so that whole curve. But if I told you right here, for that third worker, that point right there is also the same thing as the value of the marginal product of labor. So if this number is $15, then the VMPL is also equal to 15. It's the value that that third worker is bringing in. This whole curve is the demand curve. The VMPL is for that worker. It's kind of like the difference between no, never mind. It's an advanced concept. Now, why do I want you to know this? Because it could show up in the AP exam. Really, other than that, it's not going to help you in this course. The VMPL is the marginal product times price. And since price doesn't change for perfect competition, it's the same thing as your MR curve, which we're about to see here. All right. Bottom line is this. In order to maximize profits, firms will always hire where the MRP is equal to the MFC. And if they're doing that, they're actually maximizing profits because they're buying the perfect number of workers. And that's what I wanted you to get out of tonight. I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to show Monopoly because I want you to have time to get this down and think about this. Next week, I'm going to do Monopoly. Okay. I'm going to then put in minimum wage. And if we have time, next week, I will do some practice problems. If not, that might get moved to the following week. So hope you guys have a good evening. And I'm going to stop the recording here. I'll stop sharing. And I'm going to stop the recording and I hope you guys have a good week.